Thank you, Cindy. Thanks very much, Skip. Wonderful presentation. We always like to hear from Wetlands Watch. A question for you about the mitigation revolving loan funds. Shore Up Connecticut started up in Connecticut. I think they were one of the earliest to do this. There's certainly a demonstrated need for more mitigation financing. I think the loans are a great way to go. Can you tell us more about the South Carolina or Texas initiative and help us understand what is the traction those programs are getting?
Well, the South Carolina program has not been enacted yet. Like I said, it made it through the first year of the legislature. And I was just down in Charleston a week ago. They're hoping to make it through the second year. The Texas fund has been set up, and it was one that slipped under our radar. I was reading about it, reading the statutory authority for it. And I'm assuming, well, the money will come from the state treasury to charge those funds, and that's the way it's supposed to be in Virginia. And the idea is that these funds would then be made available to localities to either do direct mitigation work or to provide the non-federal match for other federal funds to begin to bring the money in. The other thing that it would do, of course, is that the more non-federal money you get, the better the benefit cost ratio and the higher on the list, the priority list that you go. So that's the idea behind it. The South Carolina program was, I think, also focused on individual revolving loans to individuals where they would come in at low cost to no cost and then recharge. And that gets you a real multiplier because it's not a one-time expense. The Connecticut fund went out of business once all of its money was gone. The really good idea about these revolving loan funds is the money comes back and can then be used by the next landowner. That's the way it's set up in Virginia. They want to change it so it's a direct charge to localities, and we're sort of resistant to that.
Skip, could you address the flipping of the properties from FEMA to the land trust?
Well, it's still in the pretty much conceptual stage. We see it as a 2-year process, and we see a lot of work involved because we're going to have to work up through FEMA to see what they will and they won't accept for a use on that property, to see if they're willing to take the hazard mitigation easements and allow us to do that same kind of work. I've spoken to Eric Lettvin at FEMA headquarters about this. He's very interested in making this work because it allows greater flexibility, it brings new cash in, and the potential for using these to actually generate income to buy the next house over is attractive. We expect that FEMA is what FEMA is. We expect that there'll be a lot of back and forth in trying to match the easements that we want on the property that allow this flexibility with what FEMA currently does. I will say that FEMA has become a lot more flexible, both through Region 3, which is our region, and up into headquarters in looking at some of these. But the idea basically is that the city would flip the property into the land trust, and there would be a standard easement on the property that would be compliant with FEMA's needs and wants, and that we could then take that property and move it forward. But again, this is all work that we're planning to do. What's interesting is both cities in Chesapeake and Norfolk both want to give us properties to play with. So they're very eager to see this happen because they want to try to do some more innovative and flexible things as well with these properties.
Hi, this is Sarah Murdoch with the Nature Conservancy. And Skip, I was going to ask you something similar about that same transaction, and I'm wondering if another option is really pursuing some sort of regulatory change or something that would allow that flexibility within the HMGP program, because it seems like you can certainly make the argument that, you know, restoration might enhance further flood risk reduction. So anyway, we'd love to connect with you and work with you on that as well.
I think at this point it's probably easier to find a easement that FEMA's willing to flip the property and then go through rulemaking and guidance with FEMA. I worked in Congress for 22 years, and anytime you touch the federal regulatory system, it's a long slog. But I think if we can find some model easements and move these properties in and people can come out and touch and feel them, I think it then makes it easier to change some of the guidance and some of the regulation around the FEMA regs to make this thing exportable everywhere.
I have a question for Maria. I'm here. Maria,
It's really hard to see up here,
I
just
know
so
it
you know.
is. The substantial damage agreements, are you having legal issues with that? How are you dealing with like the legal part of that where,
As far as the assessments?
yeah, from other people coming into the communities and doing the assessments? I've heard that that sometimes is a fallback. of that.
We have not had any legal issues that I'm aware of specifically. I could see where that could be a problem, but what we've done is the individuals that come in don't go by themselves. There's still community officials with them so that they're there as part of the process. They're just making their staff bigger, hoping that will alleviate some of that problem.
Question for Maria. Hello.
Over here.
Over here, Maria.
Sorry.
That's okay. I understand, I've heard that FEMA has left some people in Florida after the 2017 flood events for long-term substantial damage follow-up, because as you alluded to, some communities aren't following the regs. Are they doing the same thing in South Carolina? Do you have FEMA friends helping you out still?
We did. They're pulling out right now. They're the state and the region are taking over the process from here forward, but they did stay for quite a while and were a great help in helping us. How we did it in South Carolina was we partnered with FEMA and we had some pretty heavily hit communities. For example, Marion County's got 311 substantially damaged structures. We took Marion County, FEMA took Horry County that was also heavily hit, that probably has in the same number. To try to divide and conquer. There were some smaller communities that were more challenging that we took, and then FEMA took some of those. So, but now that the reservists, or our friends, are having to transition out, the region and the state are taking them over. But it's at a manageable level now. We've marked a lot of them off.
Excellent. I know we have a lot of Ohio people in the room.
Nobody's
And
asking
it's
Steve.
hard to see up here, so if you disguise your voice well enough, you can probably grill Mr. Ferryman here, and he won't even know it.
Don't give them any ideas. They will.
Any other questions? Yes, up here. We have one up here in the middle.
Again for Ohio, it looks like it, and also others, using students can be very beneficial. So do you have some advice and suggest, because I know there's the other problem, students are only around usually for a semester. So any suggestions on how to get involved with students and successfully use them?
Yeah, reach out to the university. I mean, again, Ohio State has that great booklet that they give out every year of the incoming students. And we're allowed to keep them pretty much from the time that they're at the university until about 6 months after they graduate. So try to get them hired on early when they first start the program so that you have them there, because it takes time to get everybody up to speed and trained and whatnot. So try to grab them early and keep them as long as you can. And it's been a great experience for us, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody. You just need to reach out to the university, because chances are they're going to have some type of program. They want to get these students involved so that they can get employed, and it makes their university look good. So just reach out to them.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Skip, it's
Yes.
Velma Smith from Pew Charitable Trust. And I'm just wondering whether the same concept that you're talking about using for the easement situation and getting a buyout and with the private developer, if there's been any instances that you know of using that concept, basically a transfer of development rights, to keep a development from going in the wrong place as opposed to moving somebody out.
No, I'm not aware of anyone who's done it, who's used TDR, transfer development rights from soggy to dry areas. It's something that a lot of people have talked about. Transfer of development rights is pretty complicated for localities because you got to have a receiving zone and a sending zone, and it's got to match up with the financial interests of the developers, and frequently it doesn't. The reason it works in Norfolk is they changed they did a complete resilience review of the city, and they rewrote their entire codes and ordinances over the course of 3 years, and they came up with this approach. You probably could do that elsewhere. We're talking to some people down in Georgia, in a rural county, about doing that in order to do exactly that, in order to start pushing the development uphill and keeping it from down in the plain. But it is a lot easier if you've got local ordinances that really squeeze down here and relieve it up here, and then sort of outline that path to developers. But it's not something that I've seen used to deny new developments. What is happening, the city of Virginia Beach just turned down a subdivision request in the soggy part of the city based on future flood risk. They were sued by the developer, but they won in court. It's the first time I know of that a locality has used future flood risk to prevent development. That was something they did on their own just because they're getting hammered so bad because of all these storms we've had in the mid-Atlantic. So if there's a political will, you can actually do it on your own. But I don't know anybody who's doing the sort of soggy TDR, transfer development rights, yet.
This question is for Maria. Can you give a quick overview of what that volunteer training scenario looks like for folks that come in right after a disaster happens, and how you go about doing that?
We're setting it up right now. The intention is that you would have to take one of our training programs where we go through the entire system as far as, in our training we do what is a substantial damage assessment, how you conduct it, and then we take you out in the field and do one, and then teach you how to use the software. So in that process, you will have to have annually keep the training. You will have to have already have an agreement, and your boss has to sign it, to say that you're willing to commit so many days for a certain number of time. What are you willing to commit, and all the equipment you're going to have to bring with you, and the understanding that it's a volunteer network. Yes, now that the DRRA has passed and there's Section 1206 reimbursement is available, but that you're going to be dealing with per diem and hotel and time, and dealing with that ahead of time, trying to handle all of that up front so that communities are not surprised by when someone wants to go volunteer that they're having to take some of their community resources with them. And then they're to stay a certain amount of time. We're trying to mitigate the impact of constantly having people rolling in and out. Coming for just one day isn't really going to help a community. We need you to stick with the community at least a couple days a week for a couple of weeks. And if we can get that down, then we can help. Look, we used FEMA Corps at this time, and the FEMA Corps group stayed pretty consistent. So we were able, what it allows DNR to do through the flood mitigation program is we'll be able to keep the consistency, hopefully by going through and checking and QCing every night the data and looking and making sure that we're not getting huge skews on percentages. And then if we are going and checking and seeing what's going on in that area. So we're hopeful it's going to work, because we've got a lot of trained people now. If anybody else needs any help, I'm sure ours will be happy to help another state.
We have time for one more question up here in the front left.
Good morning. My name is Emmanuel from the municipality of Bayamón in Puerto Rico. I would like to, any of you can talk a little bit about the relocalization process of the people who used to live in those open spaces, because in Puerto Rico we are having trouble telling people they have to move out of their houses.
Okay,
Any
so
thoughts?
we've had a similar problem where in our low-income areas, it's very hard for people to understand that their house is unsafe. And we've had a lot of the same issues where it's hard to get them to not live in the house in the condition it's in because they have nowhere to go. So we've had to do a lot of education on that. And to some degree, some communities are they're having to let them live there and let them repair to a certain point and then let them live there, wait for the process for if they want to appeal their substantial damage determination or if they want to make a decision on their own. The other thing we've come into that is really important to understand, when you get hit 4 years in a row, and some of these communities have been hit 3 times, that the communities and the individuals are out of money. There's no money for match for a grant. There's no money to repair their home. They're just tapped out. They spent all their money, Town of Nichols, they spent all their money repairing from 2016. They literally moved in a couple of days to a couple of months before Florence hit, and they flooded worse the second time. And they don't have the expendable income to do anything. And so now the community's got a lot of structures that are abandoned or people living in structures that are truly unsafe. So they've had on the building code side is how a lot of them have been able to, the ones that are truly unsafe, have had to pull them out that way. And if it was okay and they were just trying to work through a grant process or figure out what they were going to do, they've been able to, through FEMA's allowing you to stay in it, they're in there. The issue on the compliance side is once they're in, you're going to have a really hard time getting them back out or to do anything once they've made those kind of repairs.